boroughs is your approach to short support here as opposed to campaigning elsewhere in the state where you're in a stronger position?
So I got in this race a little over 18 months ago. The first 6 months of the campaign, we had campaigned at least twice in every county in the entire state. We have been campaigning all over the state since April 8th of 2021. Over the course of the rest of the campaign, we'll be campaigning all throughout the state. I find myself in this city almost every day. I believe that it's very important to talk to everybody. I'll meet with anybody. I'll go to any community. There's nowhere not to go. When we were together in Morris Heights a couple of Fridays ago, right after that fatal knife attack, there was a guy at the press conference, similar to a group like this, and I went up to him and I said, hello, thanks for coming, what's on your mind? It seemed like he had something on his mind. And he said in that area, they've given up on the government helping. He says that if you want to fight me, just let me know when and where. You bring your knife, I'll bring my knife, and we'll just settle it amongst ourselves. And I didn't think that he was exaggerating at all. It came across as somebody who I think has actually done it a few times. He seemed like a pretty hardened guy who has essentially given up. The streets have been surrendered. That makes me want to go to these areas even more. There are other people in government who say, okay, well, you know what, stay away from there. But that's the whole reason why you've reached that point where they feel like the streets are surrendered, is because elected officials aren't stepping up, showing up, and leading. And there are a lot of places inside of the city where you don't see Kathy Hochul, where you wouldn't see her. She'll fly over it, she'll drive past it, she'll ride around it, but you're not going to find her outside of the subway station on Morris Heights after a knife attack the night before. She's not going to be talking to that guy. We're here in Jackson Heights. By the way, where's all the other elected officials, especially the elected officials who attack law enforcement? Stop, stop grandstanding. Stop trying to just, pander to some people who want to handcuff the justice system instead of handcuffing criminals. They all should be out here. They're losing their own constituents. As far as the entire state goes, we'll continue traveling all across the state. And as far as what we're tracking internally, we've been in the low 30s. There was a Doug Schoen poll. He's a Democratic pollster. He came out with this poll just before the weekend. He said it was a 6-point race. He had us in the low 30s. That's what we're tracking. There's a big enthusiasm gap. And the one thing that I would say for members of the media who analyze a poll, the one thing that I would point out whenever looking at these smaller subsamples is that when you do a statewide poll, before you put it out, you want to make sure you have the right amount of Republicans and Democrats and independents. You might look at the age breakdown, the gender breakdown, the geographic breakdown. But that doesn't mean that within that smaller subsample, that the subsample itself is broken down correctly. It doesn't mean that in the New York City subsample that they have it broken down correctly between Republicans and Democrats and independents. It doesn't mean that they, it doesn't mean that they polled Staten Island the same way that they polled Bronx or Manhattan. How many calls were made into Brighton Beach and Bay Ridge and Middle Village, versus some of the other areas of the city that they could have polled. So I would just say to members of the media analyzing the poll when it goes to the smaller subsects is just understanding that those areas aren't all individually broken down to be their own accurate poll itself. It's just when you're doing the poll, you collect statewide, and you just try to make sure that you have enough answers from New York City, and then you use all of your answers to try to get the right poll with the methodology statewide. Yes.
Real quick, Congressman, together with Mr. Esposito, what's your hard and fast message to criminals should they become eligible?
Well, they're not in charge of any New York street anymore. starting the first moment, the first day, the culture in this state changes. Law enforcement will be able to know whether it's morale, whether it's tools, resources. They have a governor who has their backs. Law-abiding New Yorkers will be able to walk 15 blocks in Manhattan again, rather than having to call an Uber to go 2 blocks. And by the way, there's a lot of attention to what happens inside of New York City, but you have a mother of 3 who a week and a half ago was murdered in front of her 3 kids by her husband, released the day before after a slew of domestic violence charges, was released because the judge did not have discretion to weigh dangerousness. A change that, by the way, Mayor Adams has been calling for, and I agree upon. Had to release the guy. The mother is saying, the wife is saying, he's going to kill me. The next day, he killed her. She was wearing a bulletproof vest. We saw the story of the Long Island dad who was up in Marist, getting a cup of coffee, checking out of a hotel for parents' weekend, ends up in the line of fire and is murdered. 2 Sundays ago, I had a drive-by gang shooting on my front yard while my 2 16-year-old girls were home. So while we pay attention to these very important public safety issues inside of New York City, inside of the 5 boroughs, we are having a conversation that is very important to others all throughout the state, because we're talking about stories that happen from Suffolk County to Erie County, and it's happened in plenty of other places, in Syracuse and Rochester and elsewhere. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.